Welcome to another art tutorial. I'm Nate Fossey. Today we're going to look at how you can find and get help. And it's probably one of the most important questions you will have starting out with R in RStudio, but it's something you'll always need. Everybody uses the help functions. So this is something that I encourage you to use, to explore, and I think it's a way to enable you with, equip you with the capacities to seek out answers to questions that you might have. Because the great thing about RStudio and the R community is that it is very much online and open source, and it's a very giving community in the sense that there are a plethora of resources available to you online if you go out and just look for them. And I'm going to give you 3 ways to find help in R. So if you have particular questions, of course, you can go to particular experts, but the great thing about R is quite often a lot of the questions that you may have are likely have been asked by others, in part because the R community is so diverse and includes so many participants, but also because so many people are giving in the R community in terms of giving their expertise and sharing their experiences. So let me give you the 3 ways you can find help within R. So let's go to this. First, I'm going to point you to probably one of the most important websites when you use R and look for help. And this is and I would recommend that you actually bookmark this link. I'm going to open up my web browser and I'll show you that I actually have this bookmarked as well. I'm going to go to it and I'll put it on the screen. And this is a website called rseek.org. Now, of course, you can always Google something through the Google search engine, but interestingly enough, R was produced and developed at a time before search engines and the internet were actually considered or thought of. And it's actually relevant when we think about what we're going to do when we search for help with R, because R is simply a letter. RStudio, of course, is a term for a wrapper or an environment in which we can use R quite easily. But if we're talking about base R and the R programming environment in particular, quite often you may not find what you need by simply typing the letter R followed by whatever package or whatever problem you may encounter, which is why the R community has adapted to the internet and provided this search engine that is specific to R, which is called rseek.org. So what it does actually is it permits you to essentially do a tailored Google search to a wide variety of forums and websites related to that are relevant and prevalent within the R community. So it's essentially consider it the Google search engine for any problems you might have with R. So, for example, one of the perennial problems we've always had was how to install R, and perhaps how to install R on a Mac computer, or how to install RStudio, or why can't I load the Mosaic package? My go-to place whenever I encounter questions, I will go to rseek.org, and I would recommend you do that as well. If you notice that if I click the search engine, I'm going to increase the font size. You'll see that this is actually we're actually using Google here but it's a kind of a ready-made Google search engine. And as you see, I have, in addition to the course website, you'll see that I have rseek.org in my bookmarks right here, simply because I think it should be your first place to go when you're thinking of a problem. I'm going to show you 2 other ways. But before we do that, well, we'll do that actually. Well, let's look at how to install RStudio. And we're going to say on a Mac. Download RStudio. RStudio, using different versions of R. Here's a support file. Version control. Here's a package called DevTools. Here's a great website, RBloggers, provides a lot of information. Here we have info on installing R on in the Macintosh operating system. Package development prerequisites. It basically describes essentially what you need to install RStudio. I discussed that a little bit when we referenced installation. But you, in general, shouldn't encounter that many problems. That doesn't mean you'll never encounter problems, or that you'll never be frustrated or bang your head against a problem. This is typical with programming. It's quite common. But as long as you're persistent, I'm pretty certain, I'm sure that there's an answer to whatever problem you may encounter. Let's look up something else that we can use as an example, just to sort of for pedagogical purposes. Let's say how to, let's see, why don't we be a little self-referential here and using the help function. Let's see if we have, here we have a reference to an introduction to R. Let's just type in actually the function. This may actually help us here as well. Okay, so here we have an example. Sorry, I opened another program. That's LaTeX. So here we have, if I just type, actually, you know what? Help, I need somebody. Quick R, getting help with R. Here's a list of other tutorials. Here's a reference to Quick R that we mentioned before. Free R help, bug reports with RStudio. So you'll see a lot of references to RStudio, but the point is, if you have a question, try out RSeek and see what the community has. And I welcome you to share this with others. If you find a link that you see as particularly useful, share it. This is part of one of the great aspects of the online open source community that is R. It's great in that way. And of course, you can sort of see even some tabs here. I want to show this to you. Help for beginners, for instance. You see packages. So if we want to look at packages, I was looking up something called lasso regression. It's a particular kind of regression. So here we see these references. But I want to look at, say, packages. I want to see if I can use this. And here we have various packages to do this kind of analysis. And this is actually the great thing about R. You'll see something relatively recently developed. This is, exciting. This is looks like it's a, I have to look at this. Yeah, it's a partial correlation regression, which is actually really cool. It's a way of, this is just my own discovery actually. So it's a relatively arcane technique, but actually relatively useful if you have a bazillion predictors, 60 or 70 predictors, and you want to know which to include or which is most important, because quite often you can't simultaneously predict an outcome with 60 variables. So how do you reduce the complexity there? Well, there's this method called lasso regression. But I just want to show you, in this case, this is quite telling. The great thing about R is that it has a plethora of packages, 15,000, I believe, at last count. I'm not even sure. No one is probably really has a count on that, but it's increasing potentially exponentially. I'm not sure. But anyway, go to RSeek. That's where you'll find help. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to show you two other ways to do the same thing if you are beyond that. But I direct you to RSeek. And this is within the R console. In other words, if you're using base R, for example. And this was essentially I think the first way I learned to find help when I was using R back in the olden days. I'm just actually being facetious. But I want to show you that when you first open R, you'll see, the standard text here. It'll tell you the version, and then it'll say R is a collaborative project with many contributors, and that's of course the asset, and that's why I guarantee you a lot of problems may be circumvented or questions may be answered if you go to RSeek, and it also references actually here help for online help. So let's take a look at that. And help, this help function here, and you'll see other kinds of help here. Help here refers to a particular. If I show you, I'm going to emphasize two functions. First is the help function, then the help search function. Essentially, the help function is narrow, and the help search function is a little more broad, more akin to the search engine. It's a broad search for a term. So here I'm going to be actually very self-referential, because if you're interested in a particular package or function, and especially one that you've already installed or one for which you already have a name. For instance, if we go back to I closed RSeek, but for example, if we're interested in the package, say Mosaic, right? It'll suggest that we want to look at Mosaic Plat. We don't want to look at that. Actually, you know what? We'll do this. We'll look at one of those functions. Well, I think actually we'll look at Mosaic package. This is quite often the best way to get help for a particular package. Okay, so it says, you could try double question mark Mosaic. So I want to emphasize that because, actually I want to point that out because you could actually do double question mark and then have your search term. We'll go with my original intent, which is actually to be a little strange, loopy, and self-referential, and look at, if I can do this. Yeah, help is the primary interface to the help systems. They're telling you what it is already. Let's look for what the help function does. And what what RStudio will do is it'll take you to the documentation, the R documentation, which is pretty standardized. And I will walk you through that later in another tutorial. But the main point here is if you're looking for a particular term, especially a particular function or package, not necessarily with Mosaic because it is actually much more than a package. It's a bundle of packages. You'll see that here we have information on the syntax and other aspects of the arguments, the elements of that function, as well as other details. The best approach, I would say, when you do the help function is to scroll all the way down and look at some of these examples. These are worked examples that are probably the most useful. You'll see a reference to even the help search function for finding help pages on a vague topic. Exactly. So we'll go to that now. So, but the main point is that the help function is expressed two ways actually. You can type help and then type whatever you want on a specific term, and if you don't find what you're looking for, then you can use the help.search function and put that in quotation marks what it is you're looking for. Another way to type both of these commands is to type question marks. But let me show you another package that's relevant to the help function. I'm trying to think of a relevant package that I may have. Let's look at my package list that I like. Let's see, I got, okay. Let's go to, I think we got ggplot here. This is a plot function that I believe I have. We'll see if we do. No, I don't. Okay, then we'll just use the ones that I have. We'll use, oh, I see. Let's try this actually in quotes and see if that'll get us what we need. New. Okay. Well, let's see. As you can see, there are a few limitations of using this function, but oh yeah, okay. Foreign. You'll see actually when there's typically a suggestion for that particular help function, that's usually the recommendation you should follow. And the foreign package, by the way, incidentally, is a base function, but there it is. Let's try another base function. Let's try sample, for instance. We're going to try the sample function. There you go. So here we have a function that we've used before, which is the call a random sample. Let's see if they have any examples down here. Yep, here we have that. We won't go through that, but the main point is, if you're looking for something in particular, sometimes but not always, the standard help function, the narrow search within our documentation will help here. This is where I would go for a narrow search for something that I already know or for something specific. And in essence, it's the help file, the documentation file that corresponds to a particular function or package that you might have. It's not always consistent, as you had seen with the Mosaic, but here, for example, we can see that the mean function that we used in numerical data analysis is there. Let's look at let's say another function, the rflip function. So here, you don't see that available. So it's not always the best way to find something. Let's look for another function that I'm thinking of. Okay, a mathematical function. Let's look for a factorial function. Let's see if we can see what happens there. Okay, so interestingly enough, sometimes it won't take you to the direct function, but it'll take you to maybe a category of functions. Here we have, so I typed in factorial, which is one of many possible mathematical functions. Here they put it under a list of different functions here. You can, here you have the different kinds of functions. There's a description of those. It'll also look, I don't think that requires any more explanation, except to say that you can always do a question mark. I'm going to type in the console for right now, but we can always do a question mark, for a help file. So let's say we'll look at GLM, a type of model. It looks like I have that, so see if we can get the help file there. Okay, so this is a type of regression model, a more complex model. This is something that is that's helpful. If the base plot function, if you want to plot standard regressions, any generic plots of two variables, there it is within base R. So the emphasis here is that sometimes it's not always the most useful. Let's go back to Mosaic and see why. Why we're not getting the Mosaic package. And this may be because, nope, I thought maybe it's because it's case sensitive. But let's take a look at the Mosaic plot. Right, that's a function that is used within within categorical data analysis, and you can see more elaborate description. So I would say that's for narrow documentation searches. Sometimes it's not the most useful, and I would say that because R is open source, sometimes you'll have very little information that's available, and it may be befuddling or perplexing. Sometimes you'll have what are called quite elaborate documentation, including what I like, which are vignettes, which are more extensive functions that will describe in detail data applications and links to PDF files. And sometimes you'll see more references. I like this. This is a nice help file because it actually has quite a few references that you will need if you want to perhaps cite a user-written package or if you want to do something else. Now let's take a look. Let's click on this Mosaic function, as I said before, because this will take us to the third way of. Let's see if I don't know if it's taking us there. The third way of getting help I want to emphasize. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to do this. The other way of getting help is with a broader search term. So we can do a more narrow search term within the console. We can also do a broader search term. So and that's through the help.search function. it's better to use it within quotation marks, the term that you want to use. I just did a self-referential help file, and you'll see that this is not necessarily that helpful because it will include anything that may reference the word help, but it's good for maybe broader search terms. And the reason you need quotes here is this is I recognize as a string variable, as a set of characters where spaces might matter or other kind of characters might matter. So we might do generalized linear model. This fancy. Oh, here, you know what? Well, I'm going to do lasso regression again, and we'll see what happens. Lasso regression. Now we should see something here at least. No results found. Okay, so that shows a bit of a limitation here when you look at our documentation. Let's look at generalized linear model. So here you have some examples that I think are quite useful. But again, I think the relevant point here is that not every function is available. You may not find help in every location. That's why it's useful to search in many places. In general, if you're looking for specific documents or documentation in reference to a particular function, and you should really use the help function or just the single question mark followed by the search term itself. And this, of course, is for particular packages. So the reason it's not looking for Mosaic is because it's a bundle of packages. I wasn't actually certain that it would be that narrow because most often I work outside of the Mosaic package. But you'll see even here, it won't even recognize the tally function. We'll see if that's here as well. Yeah, see, so then it recommends to you automatically, if you can't find what you're looking for, it'll ask for that broader search term, which is a keyword search. And here you should see it come up. And in fact, you do. You see tabulate categorical data. So you'll see a description of the link, and then you'll have you'll see the link itself, and you'll see a description of the link. So sometimes you'll get so many results that it may not be that helpful. You may be bombarded by results. But in general, if you don't find what you're looking for with a single question mark, try the double question mark. You can do the help search or the single or double question mark search. It gets quite intuitive, actually. Now, I was going to tell you there are 3 ways to do this kind of analysis for help in RStudio. I keep going back to the rseek.org search engine. I find that to be the most helpful. If you're looking for specific stuff within our console, you can use these 2 functions or their equivalents, which is the single question mark, which is a narrow search, a broader keyword search for within the R documentation. That will help, and that's necessary within the R console. Within RStudio, I'm going to show you some other ways to, in some ways, do the same thing, but perhaps slightly differently. Especially, and I think this is relevant, especially if you're not really accustomed to using syntax or using the console. I would still strongly recommend that you try to generate the instinct to use the console rather than the drop-down menus and tabs. Only because if you look here, you'll see my history of searches, and whenever we talk about what I've referred to as workflow, this is in particular quite useful, extremely useful for getting an audit trail and a documentation of how you got to where you are. Especially if you find out something really interesting, you want to keep a record of that. You want to save that because you may not remember how you found something. So let's go. Let's examine this pane right here. This has a lot of different tabs here. As I've mentioned before, your interface might look a little bit different. You might have other tabs. Typically, there are 6 here within RStudio. Of course, they're here. Quite obviously, is the help tab, and these are the search results. But when you're starting out, I recommend you go here, which is the little home page. And this shows you our help. And when we go, before we start with the home page, I want to show you that I'm going to clear the history. So, for all my talk about, I guess, having an audit trail, you do have technically an audit trail. You have a drop-down menu of your history in the way you'd have your browsing history. But what you don't have is a cut and paste set of syntax that you can then use. Here I am. If I wanted to keep this, I could cut and paste this and save it for later. If I found out what it was really cool. So in general, I emphasize coding because I think it's just, to be frank, it's a better way to get used to data analysis. But let's clear this history because I want to show you what the help menu looks like without any kind of junk before. So if you look at these arrows, actually you'll see our history. Let's see if I can clear this again. Clear history. Okay, so it'll still take, so interesting enough, it may clear our history, but it'll still let us tab to our previous searches through these back and forth arrows. As you'll see, that this kind of reveals my preference for syntax over sort of what is called the GUI interface, the graphical user interface. However, when starting out, go GUI if that helps you. And I just want to show you a couple links. You can see quite a few with RStudio, these cheat sheets, which are wonderful. RStudio produces little tips of the day. They're talking about their products and packages. And here we have more extensive documentation that has to do with manuals. Here we have another link to search engines and keywords. Let's see what we have here. Here we have a search engine so this is within the help file. So this may not, I wouldn't say that this is necessarily as extensive as a RSeek, but we'll see. Let's look up lasso regression because I did that before, and we'll see what we had here. So you'll see that this is pretty narrow with regard to the keyword search. It's more in reference to the R documentation. You can look at other things. User manuals, I think, is helpful. This is a good to browse online. But I would say that if you want to look for other sources of help, you can actually look at this little tab, Find in Topic. Let's see what we have here. Let's look up a Mosaic plot, for example. See what comes up. Well, it looks like that isn't working for whatever reason. Let's refresh that window. Well, all right. I'm not sure what Find in Topic. I'm not sure why it's not doing that. Maybe. Oh, I see. This is mea culpa. Sorry about that. This is actually not a search engine. This is if you're bewildered by the number of links here, and you're just an absolute disoriented. Maybe you want to say, I want help me now. Well, that doesn't really help. If you type help, you'll see that word highlighted here. I'm not sure how useful that is, but you may find that to be helpful. You can see getting help with R. It'll take you to a new web page here, and quite often these are within RStudio. So let's take a look at this. Getting help with R. They have an online guide. They reference RSeek and several other websites such as Stack Overflow. But I would say, just if you read the description of RSeek, I think this is clearly, a strong endorsement by RStudio to use RSeek as well. The RSeek meta search engine provides a unified interface for searching the various sources of online R information. If an answer to your question is already available online, RSeek can help you locate it. So it's another way of kind of getting you to RSeek. There are some other things to do here, but I like what I want to direct you toward are these cheat sheets, which I have pointed toward. Again, here's another tab that opens in my web browser. You can download these as PDFs. It's a great way to know about R. I would recommend the RStudio cheat sheet, print it out in color. It's one document, and I can go over that in a later tutorial. The rest of these are I feel free to download them, but they're not necessary at all. Actually, none of this is, but I'm just saying, if you want to learn a little bit more, very useful. I would scroll down and actually look at these two cheat sheets. Base R is several pages long. I find that to be very useful. I think that's a great introduction. I think it's probably the best place to go for help in terms of if you're looking for a sort of a too long didn't read version, a consolidated compendium of some of the basic arguments that we haven't really gone over in the class, but you want to look at in greater detail and that interest you, base R. Or if you just want to know what are the bare elements of what most people who are active in the R community know, what are the functions that they know, what's the lingo, so to speak. Base R is a good place to go. But those are the two main sources, I would say, is this RStudio cheat sheet, which just explores and explains the various aspects of that RStudio, and then base R. Advanced R, I would also recommend. But again, this is all optional. And I wanted to emphasize too. I had mentioned this earlier. There are several translations. Probably, well, not in Chinese it looks like, but in various languages as well, which is really cool. Let's see if we can open one of these. Let's look at the French R. I have never even opened this. Let's open up French R and see what that looks like. This is pretty cool. So it's basically a version of RStudio en français. So we can see. Okay. So here we have. Let's see. So what's great here is it actually it keeps the syntax in English, but it actually describes in the comments, these highlighted comments, what it is. So, écrire de code, assistance R, caractéristique RStudio Pro. That's about as good as my French is, but and actually, it's in some ways I think it's a little bit. Well, actually, it's identical. This is a direct translation of the English version. Pretty cool, though. So you may find your language there, you may not, but quite useful. Okay, last thing I want to show you. In addition to this pane here, so here we are, we might be in our environment. You can click here, you go home, you get these links. You can also go to help right here. So this is the neat thing about R. There are many roads to your path in your search. This can be vexing at times because there are so many ways to do a particular analysis. You may look at a friend, when you get into R, deep into R, you may find that when you look at your friend's code, it's quite idiosyncratic. It might have a personal style to it that it doesn't follow yours. But what I want to show to you is I want to show you the links to these cheat sheets right here. So here's the RStudio Interactive Development Environment cheat sheet right here. So let's open that, and what do we have? Oh, it takes you straight to that PDF, and it's opening right here. So that's another way to access help. So if you don't like the panes, you can just look at this drop-down menu here. Let's see what else we have with diagnostics. We don't need to worry about that. I would go to the cheat sheets. And then I would say, let's look at our help. Where does it take you? Oh, okay, that's nice. So our help really, if you're here in a different tab and you don't know where the help file, the help tab is, or perhaps you've altered your window so you don't actually see it, then you can actually go to the drop-down menu and it'll direct you to that tab. So some of these functions may not be the most elaborate or useful, like typing in the verbatim words, but if you know what to look for, at times it can be helpful. If you look for cheat sheets, you can type them here. But in general, I would say these cheat sheets are quite useful, and I would say as well, exploring some of these links. But the main point is there are many ways to find help within the R environment. You can do this online through search engines. I find in my own work, online, as you notice, I found a package that I didn't even know existed. It was developed, looks like about a year ago, but this is it's harder and harder to keep up with all the interesting developments with R. And sometimes part of the work that we do in the R community is just sharing what we've discovered in terms of new packages and helping disseminate those or explore those or explain those. In my own work, I will typically go to RSeek if I'm looking for new packages or new methods. These are user-written packages that may not be part of base R. If we're looking about information for a package that I've installed or that's in the library, and if you want to look up some of the functions we've used in greater detail, I'll use the help function. And typically, because when I'm looking for help, I'm not including that as part of my workflow, I'll just typically type that in the console. So the standard help function, the more narrow one, you can look at you can look at some essential commands. And as we saw, there's some heterogeneity in terms of what you will get. Sometimes you won't get anything useful. Sometimes you may look for a particular function, and it'll give you just a list of mathematical functions. Sometimes you'll have extensive documentation. Sometimes you won't have anything at all. And this is also important to recognize because R is open source. Some packages may not be as well established, as verified, may not be as effective. And there may be multiple packages to accomplish the same task. So that's, I think, the main thrust of what I want to give to you is or present here is simply the fact that you have the capacity, the capabilities to find help within RStudio and within R more generally. So that's it. And good luck. And if you find other ways of finding help within R, feel free to share them. Feel free to make comments on those. That's the whole point of an online open source community, is leveraging the power of large numbers and of collaboration. Thank you very much. I hope this has been helpful and informative for you. Have a great day.